America is certainly not alone in facing these challenges in this era of brinkmanship. And I'm going to come on in a minute as to why I think brinkmanship has become so dominant today. But I was made very clearly aware of this fundamental Western pattern of brinkmanship when I attended a meeting a couple of months ago in Washington at the Atlantic Council, where I had a chance to listen to a man who's probably got about the worst possible sales job today in America. That man in question is someone called De Almeida, who is the European Union's ambassador to America. And his job is to go around America and try to persuade Americans that what's happening in the Eurozone today makes sense. Even better, he tries to persuade them that not only does the Eurozone make sense, but it's also a great place to invest. Luckily, he's charming. He's a very, very good salesman. He's got a wonderfully smooth, seductive Portuguese manner. And he actually tells a very good story. And roughly speaking, the story he tells, not just at the Atlantic Council, I'm not betraying any privileges here, but in general, the story he tells, the story that Barroso, his boss, would say, is something like this. When you Americans look at the Eurozone and see the ghastly mess that it appears to be, when you look at the headlines in the Financial Times saying crisis, when you get tempted to panic, don't. Because what's going on today in the Eurozone, he would argue, is really part of a cosmetic dance, a piece of carefully staged theatre. The leaders of the Eurozone know perfectly well that the fundamentals of the Eurozone today just don't work. It's very hard to have monetary union without fiscal union and banking union. So there's a kind of recognition that the direction of travel is that you're going to have to deal with these contradictions. The problem, though, is that historically in Europe, because you've had a system of consensus amongst those 17 governments, there's really only two ways you can actually get agreement to move forward on big, tough issues. Either you all sit around and wait, i.e. have these long, interminable, ghastly, unbelievably boring committee meetings in Brussels, which I used to cover as a journalist, and they take hours and hours and hours, and nothing appears to happen. But if you have enough of them over a period of several months or years, gradually the consensus shifts slowly and action happens. Or if you don't have time to wait, you have to go for the alternative scenario, which is to have a crisis. And that will then shock everyone enough into action and you can move forward. And so if you're trying to look at Eurozone today through that prism, essentially what you can see is over the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a direction of travel. Essentially, the continent has started tiptoeing towards talking about fiscal union and actually implementing some aspects of banking union. But it only really does that by staging a crisis every 3 to 6 months. So what happens is you have drama, you have default, you have or threatened default, you have unions out on having a strike, you have all this kind of, tantrums. You have the Financial Times putting crisis on the headlines, which helps our sales wonderfully, and everyone waves their hands. And just when it seems that the whole system's about to go over the edge of the cliff, somebody, usually Mario Draghi, pulls it back. You move forward, and the game starts again. But what's fascinating is that if you turn that pattern round and try to look at America today as a European, if you looked at America from the perspective of someone like De Almeida, in some ways, whether you like the idea of that brinkmanship pattern or not, that's kind of what America's been going through for the last couple of years as well. Not quite for the same reasons. I mean, America is not driven by any image of consensus building. On the contrary, the whole system is driven by checks and balances, and it's built into the American system that there is this assumption that there should be conflict, debate, and tensions. And yet, the outcome of that system built around checks and balances, the outcome of a system built on the idea that you needed to have competitive debate to get anywhere, has produced very much a pattern of brinkmanship, of cliff dancing, of constant tantrums, of constant drama, of constant cycle of going to the edge of a crisis, everyone waving their hands and wailing, the Financial Times having yet more wonderful headlines to sell newspapers with, and then just when it looks as if the system's going to go over the edge, you pull back and hopefully, you move forward. I mean, the most obvious example of that is on the fiscal side, where we've had a series of standoffs and rolling crises over the last year. And I would love to think that that is now over. I'd love to think that, in fact, suddenly rationality is going to break out in Washington in the next few months, and everyone's going to come together and have some big, grand fiscal bargain. I'd love to do a vote in this room, actually, as to how many of you believe that's really going to happen. My bet is that that chance of a grand fiscal bargain emerging anytime soon, the chance of actually not going off the fiscal cliff at all, is relatively low. I think there's every possibility that there's going to be a lot more brinkmanship, a lot more arguments, a lot more drama in the next few months.